Okay, so today we are going to have a look at some forge basics, and what we're planning to do here is we're going to do some drawing down using the ball peen hammer to form this hook. We're then going to use a former, which is a solid round bar, to create what's called the eye, and something else, which is a jig, which we use to form this twist. Then we're going to have a look to bend our bar at 90 degrees, and then finally flatten the end of the bar down to create this little forge practice piece that we do within our S4 national course. Okay, first process is called drawing down. Once you've heated your metal up in the forge, bring it across to the anvil, and with the ball peen hammer you want to hit down and forwards at the end of your bar. The whole point of this is to try and stretch the material. If you can, it's good to try and hit the top and the side, so just rotate it back and forth, and it's just to try and help stretch that material. Once the material starts to kind of lose its colour, so the bright orange, bright yellow is starting to lose it back to the grey, get a wire brush and you want to brush away what's called the scale, which is basically all the little flaky bits that come off. Okay, you can put it back into the forge, get it back up to the heat you need, and then it allows you to stretch the material out a bit further. So this process is simply called drawing down. It's to try and get down to a point of your material. Again, we wire brush to try and remove any of the scaly bits and just to try and make sure your metal's kept as clean as possible. So you can see there it's been stretched down to a slight point. Next process I'm going to do is just basically bend that down to create the wee hook. So again, back into the forge, heat it back up. Using the corner of the anvil, I'm using the ball peen hammer just to bend that around. So I've bent it up at a 90-degree corner, and then it's essentially bring it back over and then just give it a wee tap back towards you to sort of curl the metal round, and that's what's going to use to form our little hook on the end of the bar. Okay, so drawing down and forming our wee hook, and again we wire brush. Okay, next process, I'm wanting to form the eye on this project, so that's essentially the round bit at the top. So I've got a 50mm solid bit of bar in there, which is called a former. It's inside our leg vise, and using a pair of tongs to hold one end, I'm using the ball peen hammer just to help shape my material around that bar. So that hence the name former, you're using a solid bit of material to form a shape. And once I've got it bent right around, and I can give it a wee quick brush again with my wire brush, and you can see there that I'm managing to form the shape of that round section on the project. Okay, so once that section has been formed, my plan is now to use what's called the punch hole in the anvil with a set of tongs just to bend that section back so that the round is in line with the straight part of the bar. So you can see there, if I turn it around, it's lining it up. Alright, so just using the tongs there inside the punch hole, and I've now got it lined up. If you find that when you're working with this that your bar starts to kind of get out of shape slightly, stick it on top of the anvil and a slight tap with the ball peen hammer just to knock it back down so it's nice and flat, and we can see there now I've got it into that shape. Next process I want to look to do is the twisting. So you're going to heat it back up under the forge, stick one end like this into the leg vise, and then using what's called a jig, which is essentially a bit of material with a square hole cut into it. I want to measure my distance of my twist, in this case is 80, and I'm just going to use the twist here by the jig by twisting it a couple of times. You don't want to go too many times, maybe about 4 or 5 times. If you go too much, it can actually snap your material. And again, in any of these processes, a quick wire brush towards the end helps to clear away all the kind of the scale, all the little bits of flakes that come off. Okay. That's using the tongs again just to make sure that I'm not holding onto any hot bits of material, and you can see there I've got a nice good twist going through my material. Next up, what I want to do is I'm going to do the flattening. Okay, so flattening out is on the very end of the bar. Before I get to that stage, what I will do is I can actually mark out a rectangle using a chalk on top of the anvil. This just gives me a little kind of reference point to see how wide and how long I want my flat section to be on the end of the bar. So using my ruler there and the chalk, you can see I've got a little rectangle drawn on top of the anvil. Heat my metal back up in the forge, bring it back over using the tongs, and with the ball peen hammer, this time in terms of flattening, you just want to hit the same spot over and over again. So I don't need to draw it forward, you just need to hit the hammer up and down onto the same spot. And I'm using my chalk line there to kind of get a rough reference in terms of what size I need it to be. Now you can use the ball peen hammer on the edges, the thinner edges there, just to knock it round. You can see it's slightly rounded as I'm flattening it. You can do so just to make it in, but I'm just going to quickly do this just to show you the flattening process. Next up, I'm just going to bend it to a 90-degree corner. So again, heat it back under the stones, get it nice and hot, and then you can use the corner of the anvil like I'm doing here, or you can put your bit of metal into the leg vise again and simply bend it over the top of the vise. Either way works, doesn't really matter which way you want to use it, okay? So in there, bend it to 90 degrees, a little bit of issue there, and I'm going to straighten it back up again. So the good thing about the metal is that once it's hot, it's malleable, which means you can correct any mistakes that you may have done. Next up, anytime you finish your project, you make sure it's been quenched. So dip it into the bucket of water and make sure it's nice and cool. That includes the tongs, alright? The end of the tongs can get really quite hot as well. So make sure everything's cooled down, and that's essentially the process for some of the forge basics. So drawing down, forming an eye, twisting, bending and flattening.